Lila, tell us
And
exactly who Vika is.
As you said, Vika was born and grew up in the Ukraine. Her father was the first independent newspaper owner in his region after the Soviet Union fell. She is an entrepreneur who is passionate about helping others live a life of freedom and limitless possibilities. Vika, thank you so much for being on the show today. My first question for you is, what differences do you see between life in the Ukraine and life in the US?
So first of all, Layla, thank you for that intro. When I die, will you please do the eulogy? I mean, that was the best researched intro in the known universe. So the second one, with infinite love and redefining, right, for a Ukrainian, when the country is referred to as the Ukraine, that is the old way of when it was a part of the Soviet Union. So when you look at a former state as a part of the country, you would say the Ukraine. So for Ukrainians, since 1992, we are Ukraine, no article. Just like France, not the France, England, not the England. So there we go. There we go. The girl has spoken. We have reframed. So the difference emotionally, I can only compare the difference between living in the Soviet Union and the United States because my joke is that I left the Soviet Union, it couldn't stand the separation, fell apart, and Ukraine became independent. So I take full credit for what happened, you know. But the question is very powerful. I think that is, and it's just so aligned with what we talked about just before we recorded. That is the difference between freedom and liberty. See, in Ukraine, I could have freedom because freedom is an internal mechanism of how you think and how you feel. Liberty
and
is how the regime allows you to live according to your freedom. And so when you think about it, I woke up going like, why is she not Lady Freedom, the gorgeous babe in New York? Why is she Lady Liberty? And I had to look up and understand that liberty is the right of an individual to practice their freedom and to be free from any regime ever dictating how to practice their liberty. And so freedom cannot be taken away. It can be given away. We can have a slave mindset. That's what I work with. We can choose to be slaves. Freedom cannot be taken away, but liberty can. There was no liberty in the Soviet Union. So for me to be in the US, what it means, I can be free and I can be liberated. Different from being liberal, but that's for a whole other day.
Yeah.
Oh, and we talk all
and
the time about how people confuse the message. But you're right, it is the Statue of Liberty. It is Lady Liberty. I've never in my life thought about it like that. We always talk about freedom, but what we really want, and we do help to free people's minds. So many people are stuck in their own box and think they have to do it this way or that. And that's not at all what we preach. We want them to open up their own mind, and then we also fight the governments to get our liberty where they are slowly and sometimes not so slowly stripping it away.
Yeah.
Ethan, did you have a question for Vika?
what was the difference between growing up there? Like, did you learn more? What was, say, an eye-opening moment that you saw between living in Ukraine and living in the United States?
Yeah, so growing up, as I mentioned, Ukraine was still a part of the Soviet Union, and so all of the states, inner states, had to have the same rules. So, a couple examples that you'll find very interesting. You're 14, right, Ethan? Or older. How old are
Right.
you? You're 14. So, by the time I was 14, I was called a young pioneer. So, what that meant was it was the Communist Party that ran the country. By the way, only 6% of people were ever members of the Communist Party. A lot of people don't understand that. That was a select elite. So the government chose people they thought had the most talent and they could brainwash them as leaders to keep the liberties away. So when did they start? In childhood. So as you were a little kid, age 7 through 8, you were called a child of the October, Октябренок, because of the October Revolution. And so, and then you became at 14, 11 through 14, a young pioneer. A pioneer for what? A pioneer for the Communist Party. What did it mean? It meant that you were very actively brainwashed that America is the enemy, that you need to learn to withstand the wild, rotten West. What it meant is that instead of civic or history of the world, I had military training. Every child in the Soviet school knew how to put a gas mask on, how to take it off. We were timed on how fast we could hide from the imminent nuclear attack that was coming from the United States. We knew how to clean and put the guns together. And that's not a bad skill, by the way, but neither here nor there. But we were taught to grow up in fear of being attacked by the US. Now, by the time I was 16, the things have slowed down and started decaying and falling apart significantly. But you know how you, Ethan, can choose which classes to take in school or which sports to participate in? I didn't have that choice. I'm tiny built. I'm feisty 5'3". So I was immediately placed into rhythmic gymnastics. That was my, destiny. I was destined for rhythmic gymnastics. And instead of choosing whether to take chemistry or physics or astronomy, I had to take them all. Once again, not necessarily a bad thing. The absence of choice is a bad thing. The good education is not necessarily a bad thing. So those were the very striking differences of growing up. And for example, you were not allowed to show any sign of religious liberty. So if you were Christian, you couldn't wear a cross. If you were, let's say, Muslim, you couldn't wear, your regular head covering. So you were not allowed to show any spirituality or religion as such. And why? Because government was God. We will create a God if we are not allowed to have one. That's because we're all believers.
The Soviet Union took it to a whole new level, but really throughout all of history, the two competing powers, there's always been three groups. You have had the church, whichever church that happens to be, or organized religion. You have had the government, which might be a king, a monarch, or a dictatorship, or a democracy. And then you had all the rest of us citizens. And there have always been disputes with one of the first two always controlling the rest of us. And for the first time in the last, oh, really in the last century, it has really opened up thanks to the share of energy, technology, and just information. And I think we have a much brighter future over the next 100 years. We'll talk more about that right after this break.